Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm doing my February reading wrap up. So a little bit of a slower month in February. I only got through 5 books and the primary reason for that was because I was really focusing on War and Peace. I only have about 100 pages left or so of War and Peace, but I am going to be doing it in my March wrap up because I haven't actually finished the book yet. But I've been really enjoying it so far, and the plan was only to do like roughly 300 to 350 pages each month, but I just was so invested in the audiobook that I found myself reaching for it over and over again, and so that definitely contributed to a huge number of the percentages that I read in February. But obviously that's just from one really big ass book, so it definitely took some of the slots as such for other books, so on paper it looks less productive. So what books did I actually finish in the month of February? The first one I want to talk about is Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neill. This is a book, it's non-fiction about mathematics, specifically looking at algorithms and how algorithms and artificial intelligence is kind of starting to dominate the way that we tend to use or sort of perform a lot of tasks in our day-to-day lives. So it's looking at things like how job applicants are selected, how life insurance is calculated, things like how it is used within the prison system to sort of calculate should people be allowed out on bail and things like that, and just a huge range of different areas that you might not have realised is very reliant now on being fed input and sorted through en masse by computers with no human being looking at it. It was an interesting book if you are not aware of this process, but I think if you are aware of this and you've read it in other areas or sort of come across this idea before, it's not really adding anything crazy new to it. It also is an incredibly American-centric book, which I did find quite frustrating because a lot of the things that they were talking about, like, you know, the way that Facebook handles our data and how it changes what is seen sort of politically on your feed and how it curates that, is something that is very much an international feature and something which internationally other countries have managed to definitely interfere with. I think that's a fairly well documented fact by now. So to focus entirely on American law, I think missed quite a few bits. There was a brief nod to the European Union and GDPR, which is a rule that we have over here about data protection. I think that would have been really interesting to look at in more detail and see how these companies can kind of, especially on global levels, use rules in different areas to sort of work the system as such, or the ways that our information is sort of dealt with differently depending on what country you're from. But if you're brand new to mathematics, you've never really read about algorithms before, you've no idea how the big black box thinking really works, then this book I think is a cool starting place and definitely good at highlighting the fact that the idea of an objective truth is completely flawed because it's humans who have built these machines, and humans have therefore built their own internal biases into them, and we are definitely hardly free from internal biases, meaning that these computers are definitely going to be problematic as well. Then after that I read Three Little Secrets by Liz Carlyle. This is a historical romance set in Regency kind of era, I think, and it is part of a series. It's technically the last one, but like with all sort of historical romance ones, it's a brand new couple. It sort of vaguely references previous characters, but you can come to it as a complete standalone. I really love Liz Carlyle. This, like I said, was a reread. It was a real comfort read for me. This was one of the first historical fiction books I ever read as a teenager, and it really for me opened up the world of romance as something that I kind of wanted to check out, and I think for me it also introduced me into historical fiction a bit more. But the actual story is about sort of a second chance love story where there's a lot of very sort of torrid secrets and romance between them, and it is a bit of an enemies to lovers because there's definitely a lot of animosity when these two characters re-meet again, because they had this torrid love affair when they were younger, but it ended very badly due to a lot of not even miscommunication as such, but nefarious actions from other people, and so they come to each other in adults as sort of from a place of a lot of aggression and a lot of like I said, animosity. It's really sexy, really fun. I love the main characters for this one, especially our hero. He's a proper like working man, like, you know, of the people, real intensity, great work ethic, sort of like I don't have a life, I bury myself in my work kind of thing. And yeah, really lovely story, great fun. Definitely check out Liz Carlyle if you're a historical romance fan. Then I read France by Julius Julius Norwich. This is fantastic. It is a non-fiction history book, specifically looking at the history of France all the way from sort of Roman era up to, I say modern day, it kind of caps it off at the Second World War, which I think is fair enough. The author decides to do that because from that point on everything is within his sort of rough living memory. John Julius Norwich is a fairly prolific history writer who has been around for several decades, so for him it felt like it was transitioning out of history, which I do respect. I think we do need to draw a line somewhere. This is incredibly detailed, really, really good, very interesting. Like with any history that spans such a huge range of time, there are going to be bits that capture your attention more than others. For me, I definitely love the Eleanor of Aquitaine stuff. She is a woman who I adore and I know a fair amount about already, and I was really interested in the Revolution stuff and then the Napoleonic War, especially with reading War and Peace at the moment, which is set in the Napoleonic War. So for me, this was really going to be read alongside to help support my knowledge of the military history, because I really didn't know anything about the Napoleonic Wars beyond like Waterloo, and even that I didn't know what that battle was. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. One sort of quibble to it is very much focused on France as a geographic area, so it does not look into any of the colonialization of France, and I think that is something that is very much missed from this book. It's a bit of sort of a whitewashing of a lot of France's history, sort of the Haitian Revolution, the Louisiana Purchase stuff in America, and in Canada. I'm sure there's more that I'm not aware of because this book didn't go into detail about that. So it is something which, if you want to know about the machinations and sort of fights within Europe itself, especially the long and very bloody and very aggressive history between Britain and France, then definitely great book to check out. But if you want to know more about France from a more neutral or sort of social justice side of things, this book is definitely lacking in that. But I do think that John Julius Norwich did a really good job. It flows really nicely, it makes sense, the chapters are good, and there's sort of a good amount of detail without overwhelming you, and I think he does very well, given it's incredibly confusing because there's just boatloads of Henrys and Louis and Charles, and it can kind of get repetitive entirely accidentally just because like the same kind of conflicts were around again and again. So I think his writing style was really natural, it kept the flow going, and there were fun little footnotes which I liked. I love it when there's fun little footnotes. That's my favourite part of like a history book, where they're like, here's a little aside that you don't really need to know and it's kind of like a personal part, but here you go, have that. So definitely a great one to read if you know nothing about French history, like me. Or rather, like I did. Now I know loads, thanks to the book. See? That's how non-fiction works. Then I read Planta, Sapien. This is by Calvo, and this is Unmasking Plant Intelligence. I'm putting air quotations here because this kind of wasn't great. It really, especially towards the end, it fell off a cliff for me, and that's because this book on the back and on the front really pitches itself as a like pop science book, a pop biology book, botany looking at like plant intelligence, how they communicate, etc, etc. But actually Calvo is not a scientist, he's a history and philosophy of science-ist professor, however you want to call that. So for him, he's coming to this very much from a philosophy of mind, philosophy of science stance rather than the actual science itself. Not to say that that's not interesting in its own right in some ways, but it's definitely not what it said on the tin. And so I think going into it, if you're expecting, this has been very much pitched as like, look how plants communicate through pheromones and all this kind of thing, and actually it's sat there being like, what would it even mean to be inside a plant's mind? Could we even say that? Thomas Nagel said it about a bat, but what about a ficus? And like, actually, that, if you're not expecting that, is kind of irritating. Like, there's a reason why I stopped doing philosophy. It's actually really annoying. If you've no idea about philosophy of science, you've no idea about philosophy of mind, this is a cool place to start. It definitely is interesting to think about. What would it like to be a plant? The fact that we can't know, how do we define various things in science, especially when we have things like sentience and conscience and intelligence and like, and sort of consciousness and pain, and like these words that we use that we can change the definitions of depending entirely on what we're interacting with. And there was a period of time fairly recently where we didn't think animals could feel pain, or we didn't think babies could feel pain. So I'm not for a second saying that I'm definitely like a huge skeptic. I think the plants have a lot more to give us, but I do think this book was pitching itself just missold from the back, like marketed wrong essentially. And I think that people are going to be really frustrated going into it when the guy starts, especially at the end, talking about like plant ethical committees and should we anaesthetize trees before we cut them down, and like, listen, if you're into that kind of thing, fair cop to you, mate, but that is not my scene. It made me actively want to go out and like cut down a tree. He was really annoying at the end of it. So this is one that I would really struggle to recommend. I think I still gave it 3 stars because there were loads of like cool facts along the way that I definitely really appreciated. And there's definitely some like, this is so early on in plant science that this book is definitely sort of the foundations for stuff that's going to come later. I just don't think we're at that point yet. Too much of the science was like, there's one person who did one experiment that we haven't been able to replicate, or no one's even tried to replicate yet, or one guy's trying to get funding for this thing because he managed to pull it off with one plant but has no idea if he can do it across the board. Like, it's very early days, and that just means that this is a distinct lack of actual scientific content in this book, which means you get a lot more of the hand-waving philosophy of mind stuff, which again, if that's what you're here for, awesome, cool, you'll really enjoy this book. I'm not saying those conversations aren't interesting to have, but I would have really liked to have known that that's the conversation I would have been walking into. And then the final book I finished was also not really a win for me, which is really embarrassing because these are both on my 5-star predictions and I completely fluffed these two. And that's Long Division by Kiese, Laymon. This is a fiction book. It is sort of a time travel kind of book, I think. And the way it works is there's actually one story going this way and then one story going this way. This is why I bought it. I thought it was a really cool gimmick, and I have read Kiese Laymon's autobiography called Heavy, which I absolutely adore, gave 5 stars, one of my favourites, totally recommend it. This one did not work for me for a couple of different reasons. So it is about, this is one of the problems. I don't know what happened in it. I've read it and I don't know what happened in it. It's about a guy who's like a black teenager in, I think, Mississippi, or insert state similar to that here, where he goes on a spelling bee and he fluffs it and then he becomes like a viral internet sensation for fucking it up. And then there's a girl who's missing and he might be connected to the girl who's missing, but he might not be. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens, and there's a few like big shock twists that I won't spoil but came out of complete left field, and I was like, whoa, the book has changed genre, what is happening here? And then there's some time travel, and he goes back and he might be his own granddad. I don't know. I don't know what happened. And you know, if you get this book and you really enjoyed it, you've read it and you were like, it was so clever, awesome, great for you. Maybe I'm just too thick to get it, but I was just sat there being like, I don't know what's going on anymore and I don't know who I'm supposed to care about. And then to kind of tap things off with that, Kiese Laymon is a brilliant writer who is very good at perfecting a voice. The only problem was the voice was of a teenage boy, and I didn't want to know about the voices of teenage boys when I was a teenager, let alone as an adult woman in her 30s. Like, teenage boys' heads is not a space that I want to spend any time in. And I do get the vibe that this sort of like, I am not the target audience for this, and that's completely fair enough. So it's something which, like, and it was interesting from a like finding out about like the black teenage boys perspective in Mississippi, so I do respect that. But there's something very universal about teenage boys, about the way that they talk, that is just really annoying. Like, there's a lot of conversations about people's tits, or is he gay, or like the sort of like, not even the slang, like the tone just was very like grating, and I don't really like teenagers. I love kids, I don't truck with teenagers, they're not my vibe. So to spend loads of time in the head of a teenage boy in a plot that I didn't understand just felt like it was not enough payoff for the amount of work I was putting into this book. So feel free to read it, and then if you read it, tell me in the comments down below what the fuck happened. I'm reading through like the reviews on Goodreads. People either, this is the kind of, it's like a Marmite book. People either click with this and think it's freaking awesome and love the vibes, and if you're like a weird narrative person, check it out, I'm sure you'll love it. Or people like me were like, what the fuck did I just read? So it's very much a sort of one of either camp. So read it and find out what camp you're in. So that's it from me. Like I said, a bit of a shorter wrap up in February, and honestly not great, other than the reread and France. Like 3 out of 5 of the books were a bit meh, so that's not ideal. But March is going really, really well. I'm enjoying War and Peace. I have only an hour left for the audiobook, that given it's a 60-hour audiobook, I'm well impressed myself. I did a solid 50 of those in the month of February. Well impressed with myself. And also the stuff that I'm reading for the Women in History month is really, really good. The 2 that I've got on the go at the moment, sorry, the 3 I've got on the go at the moment, I'm enjoying every single one of them. So hopefully this will be a stronger month than February. So let me know your thoughts and comments and everything down below. Have you read any of these? What did you think to them? Have a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye.